Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we're once again doing another spotlight on plugins. Today we're looking at Patterson's Beam Over Barlines plugin, and if you have Finale, you have the Lite version of this plugin. In the plugin menu, under Note Beam and Rest Editing, there's a section here for Patterson Plugins Lite, and you actually get two Lite versions of Patterson plugins. You get Beam Over Barlines and Patterson Beams. Options and info is just information about the Patterson Plug-in Suite. And in Beam Over Barlines, we have three options to create, remove, or reposition pre-Finale 2009 expressions. Now, this option here, I'm going to kind of ignore because I'm assuming at this point not a lot of people are dealing with files pre-2009, so we'll just kind of gloss over that for now, but you can use this if you do have some old files and need to fix some beaming over bar lines. But let's talk about create and remove here. So what we're talking about with beaming over bar lines is obviously just that. So I've got this pattern here where I want 3/8 notes, 3/8 notes, 3/8 notes, and I want these two beams, these three notes to connect with one beam. Now, to do this manually in Finale, there really is no native way to do this in Finale. I can't. It's not like I can go into this bar here and press the slash key to get to beam. It's not going to work. Finale just doesn't do that. So it does require a bit of a hack, and this plugin performs that hack automatically and seamlessly and flawlessly. To do this manually is really a pain in the neck. I'm not even going to show you, but it involves manipulating a whole bunch of things with beams and hidden notes and everything. It's just such a pain in the neck that it's not even worth it. And the fact that we get this plugin automatically with Finale is just absolutely amazing. So the way that this works is that you do have to have two measures selected. You can't just choose one measure. You have to choose two measures to get the beams to connect across the bar line in between those measures. All right. We can also select more than two measures, which I'm going to do here. I'm going to select all three of these measures, and what it will do is we'll connect these beams and connect these beams. So it's very simple. Plugins, Note Beam and Rest Editing, Patterson Plugins Lite, Beam Over Bar Lines Create. And just like that, you'll see it do exactly what you want it to do. It will connect those beams over the bar lines. What's great is that all of the markings are retained. So my staccato markings, my slurs, my forte markings are all in the correct spot. So there's nothing to worry about there. Now, if we go into that plugins and do that one more time, plugins, Lite, Beam Over Bar Lines, and choose the remove option, it will do just that. It will undo that basically. So that's what the create and remove does. Now, the way that this works is that the plugin will look on both sides of the bar line and connect the beams up until the manual beam break on either side. So if you look at the left measure here, there's a beam break here before the E flat. And on the right measure here, there's a beam break basically before the D. So the connected beams are only going to look at these three notes. Now, if I were to go in here and just redo this beaming, let's say I connect this note here, now it's going to connect all 6 of these 8th notes together, which is what you'd want. So you do have to kind of set the measures up to be the way that you want them to be for when you connect the beams. All right, so that's exactly how that works. Let me just undo a little bit. Now, if you happen to have a situation like this where you have all of the notes beamed and you select these two measures, obviously these will all connect. But if you select this third measure, this plugin will not connect all 3 of these measures. It's not going to beam across more than one bar line. In fact, let me just show you this. Plugins, create. You'll see that it will actually end at the end of the bar here. So this is a limitation of the Lite version, that you can only beam over a single bar line with it. The other things that's nice about this plugin is that it will work over different meters. So I've got a couple things set up here, and I can run this plugin one more time. And obviously it will work over the 4/4 and 3/4. Now with this Lite version, you do have some issues where the beams will sometimes get in the way of the time signature. This can be solved with the special tools. With the beam angle tool, you can actually just grab that left handle there and move that beam a little bit upwards to get that out of the way. That's just another limitation of the Lite version. The other nice thing is that this plugin will beam across systems. So in this case, let's say I want these 4 8th notes to connect to these 4 16th notes. We can do that. Actually, let me just do this. I'll select these 3 measures and run that plugin. beam over bar lines, create, and you'll see that it will effectively beam over the system. Now it handles it differently. You know, obviously it's just the beam gets extended to the end of the system, and then this beam gets extended left. And it kind of looks like it's one beam because it also flipped these stems so that it's upward, so it looks like it's all part of the same grouping of eighth notes. So it will handle across systems as well. Now, the one thing to understand about this is that the way that the plugin handles beams across bar lines when the measures are on the same system versus on different systems is actually totally different. And let me explain what I mean by this. So let's go back here. Let me actually redo this. Create. So it's kind of important to know what's going on. Like I said, the manual process is kind of crazy, but you may look at this and say, okay, there's 8 eighth notes here, there's 8 eighth notes in this measure, and 8 in this measure. That's kind of not the case. The way that this plugin has to work is that it has to create an extra note in this measure and put it in place in the second measure while hiding the first note of this measure, right? So that's exactly what's going on. So if we go into speedy entry here, you can see in this first measure, I can arrow over through these eighth notes and I get to the end and I go one more, and you'll see that there's a ninth eighth note in this measure. And actually when I click out of here, you'll see this warning. If you're doing something like this, always leave this measure alone. And the plugin also manages to line up that extra note from this measure precisely with where it should be in this measure, right? And then we go into this measure and you can see that there's actually a blank space here. There is a note here, but it's actually hidden. And we can arrow over again and get to this one. And these two are also extra notes. And again, if we click out of here, you get this warning, leave measure alone. And in this particular case, we get 2 hidden notes, but no extra notes at the end because the next one is just the whole note here. So that's what's going on with the plugin. But when you do it across systems, it's totally different because obviously you're not putting extra notes in this bar, otherwise they would end up over here. What the plugin does across systems is something different where it just extends the beam here to the right and extends the beam here to the left. So it handles it differently. What this means is that you do have to be careful about after you run this plugin, if you move the measures around from system to system, some weird things can happen. In fact, if I take this measure and move it down to the next system, you'll see exactly what I mean. So now you have this bar, which has these 4 extra notes because that's the way the plugin has to deal with it when the measures are on the same system. But now it's not on the same system, so they're kind of getting off the page here. And you have nothing here, and you have this weird situation with the beaming here. So if you do need to move the measures from system to system, what you need to do is actually remove the beaming across bar lines like this. You can choose remove and do it that way, and then rerun the plugin. Or actually, if you just have those measures selected and just rerun the plugin, it will pretty much recalculate everything so that you'll get the across systems version here, and then the across bars without across systems version here where they're actually connected. So you know, all of this is to say is that you just need to be careful about, I would suggest doing this after your systems are set up the way you want it to. You want them to, because again, once you start moving things around, then some weird things can happen. So that's just what's going on there. And then one other thing to note, you know, it will certainly take care of things like, you know, beams into triplets and all that stuff. You can also do it across key signatures, but there's a little bit of an issue. So let me just show you what goes on here. You'll see that the triplet gets beamed all fine. What happens is that the notes get in the wrong place if you have it across a key change. There's a technical reason for this. Again, these first 2 eighth notes are actually part of this measure, so when they appear over here, it's not in the correct spot. The plugin just doesn't handle across key signatures that well. In the Pro version, which I'm about to show you, there is sort of a workaround for this, which I think is a much better solution, so I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, so that is the Lite version of it. If you have Finale, you have this. It's in the Note, Beam, and Rest editing, Patterson Plugins, Lite, Beam Over Barlines. If you ever need to do things with beaming across bar lines, this really is the best way to do it. Doing this manually, like I said, is just brutal. It's torture. So, all right, so let's take a look at the Pro version. So I'm just going to hop over to this other file. So if you have the full Patterson suite, we can find the Beam Over Barlines version here. It's in Patterson plugins, and it's the second option, Beam Over Barlines. And when you click it here, you actually get this Beam Over Barlines window. Now there's a lot of things that this will do that the Lite version will not do, so let's just kind of briefly talk about this. First of all, the first two options do exactly what the Lite version does: create new beams over bar lines and recalculate existing, or remove existing beams over bar lines only. This is doing exactly what the first two options in the Lite version does. There's also a recalculate existing beams over bar lines only, which will do just that. It will just recalculate. This might be handy if you've made some manual adjustments to the beams after you've done this. Maybe recalculating would be a good idea to leave some of them alone but not others. Kind of probably rare that you would need to use this. And of course the older file option is the same from the Lite version. Again, I'm not going to really get into that too much. The first extra option we have here is this horizontal adjustment for mid-measure clefs. And I didn't even look at this in the Lite version, but occasionally when you have a beaming situation over bar lines where you have these mid-measure clefs, these clefs can kind of get screwed up because, again, the position of the clefs is going to be relative to the position of the notes. And again, these 4/8 notes are going to end up in this bar here, so the position of the clef is going to get screwy. So if we actually do something like, actually let's just leave this at 0 so we can see what happens here. You'll see that the clef gets off in a screwy spot, so you do need to make some horizontal adjustments for the mid-measure clefs. I think in this particular case, and this is going to be different on every single situation, so it might be tricky to get a good value here, but I think I found that -0.2 in this particular situation will fix this bass clef to pretty much go exactly where it's supposed to. So occasionally you will have to use this horizontal adjustment for mid-measure clefs if you do have a situation like this. Now, in the next 4 options, this is where we get a little bit of some extra stuff compared to the Lite version. Let's talk about this: create mid-system beams over multiple bar lines, which will do exactly what I said you couldn't do in the Lite version, which is that you can now connect all of these beams from this note here, this B flat, all the way through to this A. All of this will be connected at once if this option is checked. And you can see that now we have one really long beam across 2 different bar lines. So in this Pro version of this is actually possible. Now, if you have that unchecked, then this will behave like the Lite version, where it's only going to beam the first one and it will stop at the end of the bar line. So you have options here with this Pro version whether or not to create them across multiple bar lines. So that's really cool. The second option here, treat all bar lines like system breaks. Now, this will do the other version of it. Remember I talked about how across systems, the only thing you're doing is really extending the beam on the left measure and the right measure. So we can actually treat all bar lines like that if we have this option checked. And with this selection made, you can see what happens. Now, this is not particularly pretty in this particular case, but you can see that the beams are broken here and they're broken here. Not really useful in this scenario, but this can be handy in this scenario where you've got these time signatures. This might be a more desirable effect. In fact, you can see that the beams, this will actually look a little bit better instead of trying to deal with the beams connected. I mean, I guess it's 6 or half a dozen, just depends on how you want to do this. So that's just an option for you as well. And treat key changes like system breaks. So this is actually a much better solution than what I was showing you before when you have the key change. Now with this treat key change like a system break, you'll get that same thing where you'll get these sort of beamlets here, and this won't get in the way of the key signature, and also the transposition problem gets solved because you're not putting these 2 notes into this measure. So treating key changes like system breaks is I think a better looking solution and a more functional solution in Finale anyway in this particular case. There's also this option here: force same stem direction over system breaks. So let's just do another one here where we have what you're seeing is this beam above here and the beam below. So with the force same stem direction over system breaks, that's what's causing this stem to get, or these stems to get flipped so that the beam goes above. But if you were to uncheck that, then you can do something different where you'll get the beam here remaining above, but the beam here remaining below, and you get the little extension here. So it's actually just 2 different ways to do that. It's up to you, whether or not one is better than the other. That's, I'll leave that to you for judgment. We do have some further control of those little beamlets that appear when you do this across the system break. There are values for the amount of extension, and what we have here is beam extension offsets for system breaks, right? And what these values are measuring is the point at which, let me just zoom in here a little bit more so we can really see this. It's the point in which the beams get offset from the right edge of the system. That would be the end of system value, and the beginning of the measure here, which is somewhere around here. Finale defines a beginning of the measure value, which is somewhere after the key signature. So the beams will, if these are set to 0, this beam will go exactly where that start of measure is, but then you can add or subtract an offset. So if we go up here, actually, let's do this. Well, now that I'm zoomed in so far, it's hard to do this, but that's okay. So with this value here of negative 0.0138, you'll see when I click go, it's just a little bit farther to the left of the end of the system. Now we can make a larger value there. If we do something like negative, actually, we can even do positive. So let's do something like this. Let's do positive 0.2, whatever, and see what that looks like. And now you can see that that beam will actually go positive to the right of the end of the system. So you have a lot of control over what you want to do with those offsets, and you have different offsets for the end of the system and for the beginning of the system. Again, positive numbers in these offsets will go to the right, and negative numbers will go to the left. So if you really wanted a big negative number at the beginning of the system here, you could do something like this to get this this little beamlet extended all the way over here. So just a bunch of different options available to you. And if you really want to get fancy, we also have this adjust slant over system breaks when possible. Now this will be relative to the slant of the beam on the measure at the new system. And there's some really funky stuff that you can do here. With this value, you'll get what you just saw, but if you do something like, a larger value here, you'll get this crazy kind of slant. So again, I'm not going to get too much into this, but you can get crazy with these numbers. There's a different thing for singleton beams and horizontal offsets and stuff. So if you really want to get fancy, you can start dealing with those situations as well. Now let's talk about the bottom of this window. There's two things here that's grayed out: all parts, all open documents. Now, interestingly, if you have something selected, you don't get those options. If you unselect something, those options become available. Now, these all parts and all open documents is sort of a universal thing in most of the Patterson plugins. Without anything selected, you can press go, and it will give you this warning that there's no selection. Would you like to process this beam over bar lines on the entire document? So you can choose to do that or not. I don't know that this would be something that's all that useful for this particular plugin. But you can also choose to do all parts, and it will basically do the same thing. It will apply this plugin to every single linked part in this file, and if you check this, it will apply it to all the open documents. Again, not the most useful thing with this Beam Over Barlines plugin. There are some other plugins where this is actually really handy. And also I would be very careful about doing it in all parts, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because linked parts and beam over bar lines can get really kind of tricky, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. Let's just actually go ahead here and beam these over the system here. Okay, so what I'm viewing here right now is the score, and you can see that the layout in the score is such that bar 12 is at the end of the system and bar 13 is at the beginning of a system, which means that in this case it's using this version of the beam over bar lines where it's just extending the beam, versus this one where it's actually creating the notes. These 4 notes exist in this measure, and then these 4 notes are hidden and everything. So again, it's 2 different ways of doing the beam over bar lines, depending if it's mid-system or across systems, right? So if you can imagine, the parts can be laid out differently. So measure 12 and measure 13 don't have to necessarily be laid out like that. In fact, I believe in my piano part, I did exactly that. So now you can see measures 12 and 13 both exist mid-system. Now this is a problem because this beam over the bar lines here doesn't look right. This is not the version of the beam over bar lines. So, you know, this is where you're going to have to get creative. Now, again, if we were to just do this so that 12 and 13 are, you know, on different systems, then all is good. But if for whatever reason the layout has to be different like this, then what you really have to do is you kind of have to go into the part, recalculate the beaming, and then again, the problem is if you go into the score, now it's incorrect. So, you know, in certain circumstances, it's kind of impossible to get it to work correctly in both the score and the linked parts. This is just a flaw in the fact that this is a hack, and Finale does not support this natively, so this is what we have to deal with. If you really need to do something like this, then my best suggestion is to, you know, lay out the score the way it needs to be with the beams, print the score, and then go into the part and redo all the beams over bar lines the way that it's supposed to be, and then reprint the part, if that makes sense. This is kind of again, this might be kind of a rare circumstance where something like this happens, but you know, again, just because of the way that these beams over bar lines has to work in Finale, there's just no way around this. There's no way to get both versions of the beam over bar lines, whether it's mid-system or across system. It's just impossible to tell Finale that it needs to be one way in the score and one way in the part. So this is one of those instances where, you know, it's not ideal, but you do have to kind of maybe run two different prints. All right, so I believe that's it. That is the beam over bar lines. This is the Pro version. I just showed you the Lite version, which comes with Finale and the Note Beam Rest and Editing section. So some really cool stuff. If you really need to do beams over bar lines, this is absolutely the way to go. Again, doing this manually is just such a slog. It's not even like, it's not pleasant whatsoever. So, you know, thankfully Patterson gave us this plugin and it's free with Finale. At least most of the functions are free in Finale. So really cool stuff. All right, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next video.